What is up, guys, and welcome to my review of Steven Soderbergh's latest film, Presence. Now, this is a film that is selling itself more so on the gimmick, more so on the narrative device that they are using, more than the plot. So essentially what you have here is a typical haunted house film, only it's told from the POV perspective of the malevolent presence, the ghost that is inhabiting this house. You have a family that moves into this house. There's a lot of tensions in the marriage. There's tensions among the siblings. The daughter had a friend that recently died, and there's just a lot of inner turmoil with this family. And so I would really hesitate to call this a horror film. It's really more of a family drama with some supernatural elements. But you're learning about these characters, you're learning about the family dynamic, and you're somewhat experiencing and unraveling a little bit of a mystery here from the POV of this ghost that just kind of walks around the house and witnesses all these conversations that the family's having. Now, I wasn't sure how I would land on this type of movie because in some ways that's interesting to me. In other ways, it feels kind of like Paranormal Activity, movies like that, where the gimmick of the filmmaking is kind of the star, and the story and the characters always feel like they're not interesting enough to really hold a whole movie. I just don't have a lot of luck with movies like this. But Steven Soderbergh is a very good, very interesting director that is wildly diverse in the things that he makes. So I checked this thing out after I walked out of Flight Risk and had my mood lowered significantly. And here's what I thought about it. Starting off with the positives, I do think that it is really commendable how Steven Soderbergh was able to craft this movie with this storytelling gimmick that he is doing, because essentially the movie is a collection of one-shot sequences, of oneers. And so you have about 12, 15, maybe a few more sequences, which is just somebody carrying a camera around, giving the POV perspective, while the actors go through an entire 5 to 10 minute scene in one shot. And that's very difficult to do without somebody screwing up, having the blocking set a certain way, have everybody know their lines, everybody acts off of each other, nobody trips over anything, nobody forgets anything. It's a very difficult way to do a movie. And we've seen movies try to give a one-shot experience all the way through. I think this is one of the more interesting versions of that because it's like a sequence of events that are all done in one shots. And so it's impressive that they're able to do that, but it kind of removes that game that we always play when we know we're watching a movie that's supposed to be one shot, where you're looking for the cuts. You're looking for somebody that walks by a wall, or the camera goes a certain direction where you're like, oh, there was a cut there. You know where the cuts are in this movie. And so it kind of lets you just enjoy the craft of what they're doing rather than playing that game. I also got to give commendation to the director, Steven Soderbergh. As I said just a minute or so ago, he's a very diverse director. Every single movie that he does has a different vibe to it. It goes for a different subgenre. I mean, he's done the Ocean's trilogy, he's done Contagion, he's done Logan Lucky, he's done Haywire, he's done Unsane, he did this movie. So he's somebody that you never quite know what you're going to get from him. And he always goes for a little bit of a different style or a different storytelling medium, or using an iPhone or whatever he did for Unsane. There's always something interesting that he's trying to do to change the game up a little bit, and I think he's very good at executing it. I also thought all the performances in the movie were pretty good. I have my thoughts on certain characters. There are certain characters I didn't really vibe with, didn't really get much enjoyment out of, but you got Lucy Liu in here as the mother, and a number of other actors I've never seen before, I don't believe, and they all play a very believable family. They have a very believable family dynamic with the marriage problems, with the sibling rivalry, with the drama that unfolds at the dinner table. It never feels overcooked. It all feels pretty natural. And that's something that you got to give their kudos to. That's hard to pull off, having that type of chemistry with your actors that fits a movie like this all the way through. And I also think that it's impressive the way that you're able to write a movie that's going to be told in this format, because you're not able to have your typical level of exposition. You're not able to set up scenes to be the way that you would normally do in a film that's not told through this POV perspective and going through different rooms and engaging with different characters. And so a lot of this movie has to give you details that eventually add up to being what the main point of the story is in the back half, just with conversations kind of in passing. And it's up to you as the viewer to kind of figure out what's important information, what's just dialogue, what's just people interacting. And then later on in the movie, certain things that were said early on actually have an important purpose and actually have a way that they weave their way into the mystery and things that are unfolding in the back half. So it's an interesting way to write a film if you know it's going to be executed in a very non-traditional way. Moving on to the mix, I'm just going to say that the POV presence gimmick here is something that I'm mixed on for the reasons that I figured was probably going to be the case for me. On one hand, it's commendable as something that's interesting, it's different, it's unique for this subgenre. I think they execute it very well for what they're going for. But it's also something that I do feel like gets a little bit repetitious and a little redundant as the movie goes on. Like, it's interesting at first, and you're kind of getting an idea of how they're going to tell this story. And after like the 9th or 10th time that they reset the stage and this presence walks throughout the house, it just kind of wears thin on me. I'm sure there's others that are going to love it all the way through. It starts to feel more gimmicky as the movie goes on for me personally. And now moving on to the negatives, and just like in my mixed column, something that I pretty much figured was going to be the case with the type of movie that this is, I don't think the story or the characters are interesting enough to carry a 90-minute experience. It's very much like the Paranormal Activity films where you spend a lot of the runtime feeling like it's just kind of mundane everyday life, and it's not until the back half, maybe even arguably the last third of the movie, where things really feel like they're kicking into gear and you're actually getting engaged with what is going on. Beyond all of that, you're just kind of living in these people's houses as they have some family drama, which is again why I think the movie is really mismarketed. And the way that they're marketing it, having quotes of like, this is the scariest movie of the year. This movie's not scary whatsoever. It's barely even tense. I don't consider this a horror film. I don't consider this a horror experience. Even though you have a ghost element, even though it's a haunted house, technically, this is a drama. This is a family drama with a few tense moments and a supernatural edge, a supernatural gimmick thrown in. And there's nothing wrong with a family drama, but you got to have characters and a story that is engaging all the way through. And I don't think that this is, or these characters are. It's just something that eventually gets a little bit interesting right before the movie decides to close out and says, thanks for coming. I can't speak too much on this, but I will say there's one character in the movie that what they were going for with them, I think they did incredibly ham-fisted. I think that they over-the-topped it way too much. And the dialogue coming from this character especially was just like, so overwritten as movie dialogue. It doesn't feel like anything that anybody on planet Earth would actually say. It's just something that somebody sat down and said, what would be really weird? Yeah, this. And there's also a lot of things that feel unresolved in regard to the family drama. Like there's just one specific element dealing with the actual presence themselves that becomes the main focus of the movie, as you can expect. But other things that are brought up regarding the marriage specifically and the husband and the wife in here. And there's a lot of questions that are raised in the first act of the film that you never really get answers to. And so it just kind of feels weird. Like, okay, did you just bring that shit up to make it ultra clear that there's problems in the marriage? Because there's other ways to do that without having this big question mark that's left unanswered by the end. So even though that wasn't the point of the story, I felt frustrated walking out of the film after seeing the credits roll going, okay, well, what the fuck was going on with that? And finally, another thing I can't speak too specifically on, I'll just say there's a series of reveals in the third act, some more significant than others, that most of which I found to be incredibly obvious. They weren't shocking to me whatsoever. I pretty much saw the writing on the wall with where they were going with that. And another one that's meant to be a lot more impactful didn't really have an impact on me. It was just like, okay, interesting, cool. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they just didn't get me to engage with this family as much as I would have liked to. They didn't get me to really invest in any of their journeys, in any of their mortalities. I mean, none of that stuff. It's just like, okay, these are interesting enough characters that certainly play well off of each other. But for a movie that I spent literally the entire runtime with these characters and almost nobody else, I felt at so much of an arm's distance from them and didn't learn near as much about them to get me invested that any sort of impact that was intended by revealing anything about these characters, especially the stuff that they actually choose to reveal versus the stuff that they oddly just never answer, it fails to make an impact on me. I was just very flatlined with it. Okay, that happened. Moving on. So ultimately, this is a movie that if it sounds interesting to you, I definitely encourage you to check it out, because I could see a lot of other people enjoying this more than I do. If you like found footage type films, if you like experiences of things like Paranormal Activity that's going to be done in a very different way, this is probably more your type of movie than it is mine. But even somebody who doesn't have a very good track record with movies like this, I think there's a lot of good stuff on display here. There's a lot of really good execution. It's just the story and the characters, which is the most important piece of the movie experience to me, that felt like they weren't done as well as the storytelling gimmick itself, which can only have value for me to a certain point if you fail at the other parts. So it's interesting. It's worth a shot. I think that it's worth one watch. But for me, it's not something I would ever go back to. It's a decent one-time watch type of movie for me. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you check down here, I'm going to put a review of Flight Risk, which is the other new release this week. And I'm also going to put a prediction video up here that I did a week ago about all the 2025 new releases that Flight Risk and Presence are both on. So check out what my predictions were versus what I actually said in my review. If you're interested, like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything else in 2025 that's coming. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.